Welcome to the Women at the Top podcast interview series. My name is Regina Barr, and I'm the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I'll be your host today. For those of you who don't know us, we are a community of like-minded women who share the Watt vision and mission. And our goal, simply put, is to empower aspiring women to lead. And we do this by providing training, information, and connections. And I'm so excited to tell you that joining me today is author Ann Bowers-Evangelista. And she has leveraged her experience as an author, a licensed psychologist, a leadership expert, and an endurance athlete for over 2 decades to maximize human potential and business results. She's the author of The Endurance Leader, Leadership Longevity in a Fast-Paced World. We all need some of this. She's an Ironman triathlete and an endurance runner. God bless her. And she brings her high performance focus and results orientation to bear in her work, family, and community. She is a prolific volunteer and a fundraiser for the U.S. Air Force, the American Red Cross, and Back on My Feet, as well as Vital Voices. On that note, welcome to our show today, Ann.
Thank you, Regina. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I wanted to talk about your book. So, for those listening in or watching, your book focuses on addressing and providing ways to build leadership that remains resilient, especially in the face of adversity. And we always like to get the backstory from our authors. So, tell us a little bit about what, um, why you wrote this book. I mean, I could come up with some ideas on my own just having gone through your bio, but tell us what made you write this book now?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And it really does create the genesis for the content, right? So I've been doing consulting and coaching work for over 25 years. And what I really saw was so many leaders being really overwhelmed sometimes in the face of the demands that are put on them. In fact, really interestingly, there was an HBR article last April that talked about the fact that managers' number of direct reports has increased 2.8 times in the past 6 years. And managers are accountable for 51% more responsibilities than they can effectively manage. That data comes from Gartner. So, the realities are there around why people feel overwhelmed. It's justified in some ways. People really are struggling, but what I have often seen is that the response is to try to do more faster, right? And it really is the equivalent of starting to sprint a marathon, right? And people really not even knowing why. Like, why is this important to me? Why does it matter? And especially over the past decade or so, we're seeing this really play out in burnout, people leaving organizations, particularly women, right? Just feeling, had clients say things like, I feel guilty all the time. I feel guilty at home. I feel guilty at work. And, just feeling like things are so unrelenting. They're burnout, they're disengaged. And the American Psychological Association is just tons of data around mental health needs. I mean, the majority of people in this country now carry a mental health diagnosis. So it's like, there's got to be a different way. And that is really what made me start thinking about my own experiences as an endurance athlete and how it related here.
That's fabulous. And unfortunately, yes. So there are so many more diagnoses of mental health issues. And in some ways it's a blessing because hopefully we're getting it out of the closet and people don't have to feel uncomfortable about um, taking care of themselves and taking care of whatever may be going on with their mental health issues. So that's a positive, even though it's on the rise, that it's more out in the open. Because I'm sure in your experience, you've seen where it's just been hidden. And I can tell you, growing up with two individuals that had some mental health challenges, first of all, back then, nobody looked at it. Nobody even,
It's
and
taboo.
whatever, well, what, not even taboo. I don't even think like parents knew to even think that that was an issue. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody was looking at it. It wasn't until we were adults that I look back and having seen some of those challenges say, wow, yeah, unfortunately, those mental health challenges started, you could see it way back in grade school, and what a different life, one of them was my brother, would have had if maybe there had been some diagnosis back then. So from that perspective, it's a good thing, even though we don't, we need to learn to help these leaders be more resilient. So that does bring me to my next question, and we were talking a little bit about this before we went live. And you are an Ironman triathlete, and you are an endurance runner. God bless you. I'm a fast walker, uh, and I don't run. I just don't run. I walk very fast. So tell us more about this background as an athlete and how you use this in the work that you do around leadership. I find it just fascinating.
Thank you. And by the way, fast walking is just as effective for health and wellness as running. So, in fact, some people would argue better because you're not killing your knees. So, I started my endurance athlete journey completely by accident in 2002. I got talked into doing a triathlon with a woman I knew at the gym, and she didn't do it, and I did, and I was like, "This was horrible. I'll never do another one." And then I discovered a group called Team in Training, which is a fundraising arm of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, and I could combine things like fundraising with doing this crazy activity, and it became a lot more fun and meaningful and purposeful for me. And so I've kind of understood over the past 20 years what it means to get through, endurance events, right? Um, and what has started to noodle around in the book was like, I think there's a model here. I have known enough really successful leaders, people who've led over decades very successfully. And it's like, what is it about that has made them successful? So I started interviewing them, like, what is your secret sauce, right? And
Tell us,
what
yes.
what struck me is the parallels with endurance athletes. And so I created a model that really looks at mindset, execution, discipline, and support. And those are really kind of for me, the grounding kind of frameworks behind this, which is we have to understand our purpose, right? Like it really starts with what's deeply important to us, because if we don't know, we're never gonna make it through those hard times. I had a conversation with a colleague the other day who said, "I gotta tell you, I don't like the word endurance." And I said, "Congratulations, welcome to the world." Like, nobody does, because we think of enduring things as being about, "I gotta get through something really hard." And I'm like, I wanna take that word back, because we are going to have to endure. Everyone will. Everyone is going to go through hard things. And if we aren't ready for that, if we don't know what's driving us, we're going to get lost in those moments. We're going to quit. We're going to pull out of the right, we're going to find some other way to get our needs met. So instead, we can start there. It really helps us build the right foundation. We can talk more about that.
Yes, and I love that your model includes mindset, right? Because the mindset is so key to how we look at a word like endurance. So, more to come. So, when we look at leaders today, many of them are stuck just trying to keep up with this blistering pace. I got to tell you, I can completely relate to that. And in many ways, it's not sustainable and it leads to burnout. So, one of the core concepts from your book that leaders can use, or what is one of the core concepts from your book that leaders could use, listeners or viewers today could use to help them with this stress and burnout?
Yeah, that's such a good question. If we have time, I'll talk about two. They're related, and the first thing is really about recovery. And we all, most, I shouldn't say all, but most people really understand, thankfully, kind of back to mental health and balance. People understand, at least mentally, the need to give themselves, do some self-care, do some, yoga, or get a massage or something to help themselves. But as an athlete, every single athlete you can think of, they have a plan for recovery. Most people don't know that LeBron James sleeps 10 to 12 hours of every 24 hours.
Wow.
Now, we think that somebody we met that slept that much, we'd be like, you know, how could they get anything done in a day? Well, the proof is in the pudding, right? And it's about being intentional, right? In order for him to perform at his best, he knows that his body needs that recovery time. And so that means we need to be, most of us come into recovery completely like it shows up somehow. We have to take a break. And then it's like, oh, let me try to, breathe instead of being intentional, saying, look, I'm going to set a boundary. I'm going to take Friday off, and I'm really going to take Friday off. I give an example of a colleague who takes a month off with his family and literally shuts down. He does not answer email. He doesn't answer calls. And he says he is successful because of that strategy, not in spite of it. And so it's really about understanding our own needs for recovery. It doesn't have to look the same for everyone. Some people don't like massages. That's okay, right? But it's
Exactly.
about being
That's too bad on
so
them, but yes.
right, I agree. And the other piece of that, and this helps people a little bit more on thinking about it with their team, is what I think of as pacing, right? And
Yes.
so when people run, there's you really try to set a pace, but if you're running a marathon, your pace may need to intentionally change. It might not be the whole thing, and often that's a race strategy is you pick up your pace at certain intervals and then you slow back down. And so I talk to leaders a lot about when you are about to go into a really busy time or you have a very tough deadline and project, how can you and your team plan for picking up the pace and then being intentional about giving yourself a break? And again, the leaders that I spoke to that have been successful over time really do this with intention. We're going to go after this and then we're going to pull back. We're going to have people take more protected leave. We're going to, you know, do some things for the team so that there is that recovery built in. And it helps people sustain their, it's a lot easier to get through that when you know there's an end. But often in organizations, people just go from one to the next, and people are like, I don't, when do I get a break? So building that really, I would say recovery and pacing are two really important concepts for most leaders.
It sounds really difficult, but I will just give a simple example that I use. At the beginning of the year, I figure out when I'm taking vacation, and then I block that time, and I try to put a bunker around that time. And to your point, during that time, uh, I try to create some boundaries. And usually, what I do if I'm gone for more than a week, I will say and let clients know that right in the middle on one day, I will check emails just to make sure that there's nothing mission critical. And my executive assistant obviously always has my contact information so she can reach me. But it's that helps me with the pacing of what I've got coming or putting into my pipeline for the year, or however your work or life manifests itself. So everybody can do that. Take a little time to schedule a little time because there's intention there and it's that planned recovery. And it also then allows you to pace yourself. So that's my simple tip there. Um,
Yeah, and can I just add something there around support, which is the end, kind of the last part of the book, which is for some people, this is really difficult. Leverage your support system. Like, if you can't hold yourself accountable, you were saying your assistant helps you with some of that, right? Make somebody else the bad guy to help you help yourself, right? Maybe it's your family decision. You guys decide when we're taking vacation, and I will just put it on the calendar. Get somebody who can help you. We do not have to be on this journey alone, right? Find some
exactly.
joy.
I love that. Find a partner in your crime. um, So you talked a little bit in your book about understanding your own personal mission. And I find like this time of year, really any time of year, is a good time to kind of revisit that and look at your values and things like that. Tell our viewers and listeners why this is so important for an endurance leader.
Yeah, great question. And I just posted a podcast about the difference between resolutions and mission because I think there's a huge difference, which we probably won't get into well, but it's a very helpful distinction. You know, our mission, our purpose is it's the foundation of everything we do and we are. It gives our work and our lives purpose and direction. And it's also really important for understanding our own intrinsic motivation. This is like language from sport performance a lot, intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. Extrinsic motivators, the things like recognition and tangible achievements, they're okay. But what really matters to us, and it's shown again and again in research, is meeting our own intrinsic motivators, the things that really charge us up and make us feel good about who we are. And I like the question, we talk a lot about knowing our why. I challenge people to say that's good, but the answer to why is because. And that sounds more reactive to me. I prefer talking about, what do you want people to say about you at the end of your life? Like, what are your headstone goals? Which big, deep things. But when we can understand what those are and start figuring out how to map those in to how we lead, and that's the hard part. That's the part leaders struggle with. Lots of people know what those things are, but they're like, I got to do all this other stuff first, and then I'll live that ideal self. Then I'll be that. Let's figure out how to, just like setting a goal for a marathon, like find the plan. Let's make the plan. So that's why I think it's really important. And it is what, when you're struggling, when you're enduring, when you have to dig in deep, that's the motivator. And if you don't know what that is, it's hard to stay motivated. So I encourage everyone to kind of start there.
Figure out your mission. Gotta start with the brass tacks there. So let's talk a little bit about your business. You started your business, Lumos. Hopefully, I'm saying that correctly in
You
2012.
are. Bravo.
Awesome. It's two L's. That's why, it's a little tricky, right? Um,
Living some Spanish speakers say "humos," which I understand as well. Yep.
okay. And that's a derivative for the Latin word, which means light. So, can you explain more about why you chose this particular name for your business?
Yeah. I think of wanting to help leaders, like, as a coach, as a consultant, I've often thought of, like, we're trying to illuminate a path for people. I am not trying to set the path for them. I am not trying to tell them which way to go. I'm just trying to help them get a light on the path that they want to follow. And that really helped me start thinking about the word light and illumination. And I actually talk about leadership ignited, which is a different element, but I think that really helping people uncover their potential, shining a light on what they're capable of, also shining a light sometimes on what their blind spots might be, that are helping them create clarity and then potentially transformation through very thoughtful guidance and direction. And so I didn't want to kind of narrow it into like a consult. Lots of consultants talk about being the, wise counsel kind of thing. It's like, that's not really my job. My job is to help people get there. So that's why I picked this very strange.
I love it. I love it. Shining a light. Sometimes we all need a light, little extra light in our lives. So, your book, The Endurance Leader, talks about being a long term leadership or taking a long term leadership approach. So, what can leaders achieve by taking a long term or endurance approach to leadership?
Yeah, great question, because I think it's easy to talk about this and be like, for those of us who are old enough to remember, like, where's the beef? Like, what actually happens on the other end
I
of
am.
this, right? Yes. Just thinking of our the other day.
Mhm.
So I think that there's kind of the soft parts of it, which are I people are more motivated and inspired, and that can help with productivity when you feel better about, I know why I'm showing up to work every day, right? So there's that personal, like, self leadership part, which is where I really start with people. Leading self has to be the center. And if we can understand what's going to inspire us, then we got a much better chance of being inspirational and motivational to those around us. But I also think that um, it helps leaders plan for sustainable success. When we are constantly just chasing the next short term goal, it becomes a lot harder to create kind of alignment. It's kind of like, what way is the wind blowing? Oh, we need to do this now. We need to do that now. People get lost. Again, we get lost. Our teams get lost. So like I thought this was our priority. I thought this was our priority. When we have a goal, even as a team, to say, what is our core objective as a team? What are we here in the mission language kind of to serve? Like, what are we here ultimately to do as a team? That helps directs our efforts. And ideally, we can bring people and team members back to that again and again. And we can create short and medium term goals that help feed those longer term successes, right? I think it helps both leaders and teams be more focused, be actually a little bit more adaptable, because it's like, okay, maybe this isn't exactly where we thought this was going to go, but where are we going up here? Like maybe we can add some flexibility. Maybe we can push ourselves in a new direction to ensure that we're meeting our overall goal. And ultimately, the goal for organizations is can we be more effective? And I believe that this approach does ensure that teams and leaders are being more organizationally effective because they're more productive and they're more aligned.
Well, that's a great segue for my next question, which was, many of the folks that are listening in or watching today, they work in teams or they volunteer in nonprofit organizations. And you've mentioned that this is great for the leader and their teams. So tell us, why does this model work with teams? And do you have to tweak the model to make it work for teams?
This is probably the question I get the most, and it is, this. How do I do this with teams? Because at the very outset of the book, I kind of talk about this is ostensibly a leading self model, and there are lots and lots of books that are focused very much on leading teams. However, as we just talked about, there are ways to take and adapt this very concept. What is our mission? How are we achieving it? In fact, I think especially on the how are we achieving it, teams are pretty good at lots of teams are pretty good at going from what's our overall objective into the specific strategies and processes we need to get there. And then, but the other pieces around how do we remain disciplined? I think that both individually and collectively, this is often our hardest thing. Another word people don't like, discipline. It simply means staying committed to something we've committed to and remaining so, and sometimes pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones. So I think that in teams, when you say, what are we committed to? How are we going to hold each other accountable to that? How do we push ourselves in order to be, I talk about mental toughness, right? How do we push ourselves so that we can be even tougher, so we are more resilient, we are more agile in different situations? So the model works the way I talk about it, and the tools I have are very self-reflective. And I would encourage every leader, start with you. Because if you can't lead yourself, you got no business leading anybody else, right? And we have to start kind of walk the talk, understand how the model works. But it's written that way, but absolutely take these concepts and take out the you and put in us. And I think there's a lot of adaptability there.
It's so interesting that, most people get hung up on the discipline component of it, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. I do a lot of dog walking between my dog and my mom's dog. She's had some knee issues, so I listen to a lot of podcasts. I just, go with the flow and say, "Okay, this is it. I gotta do this, so I may as well make it palatable." But it's interesting because one of the podcasts I was listening to, they basically said that if people could get disciplined about the stuff we think is boring and do that stuff really well, that it would really escalate so much performance and productivity in groups. So think about what you're being disciplined about, right? We don't always have to be creating the new wheel, so to speak, to be successful and to help our teams go the distance, if you will.
100%.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
we are actually winding down on our time today, and I always like to conclude this series in our conversation with a piece of advice for our listening or watching audience. So, if you could only give them one piece of advice on how to become an effective leader, or excuse me, an endurance leader, or to do something within that space, what would your advice to them be? Just one thing.
Yeah. I think the one thing is leadership and life is a journey. And it's not a sprint. It's a series of might be a series of sprints, but it is a journey. And we need to find joy in our journey. It's not all going to go perfectly. We're not going to have all the answers. Laugh, learn, fail, ask for help, be willing to be vulnerable. That is how we are going to build the kind of endurance that we need to make this journey the one we really want it to be.
I love that you incorporated being vulnerable in your piece of advice. So I will leave it at that and just say that's all the time that we have today. But thank you so much for being here with us today, Anne. And a big thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining us today. And take care and be well. Until next time.